Welcome everyone. It's really good to see so many seats full right now. So I take it a lot of you probably watched the debate last night, but I wanted to debrief maybe. But
I didn't watch.
yeah, well, thank you for coming to our YWCA Talks series, which just started today. Yeah, I'd like to introduce Ben, Lee, who's our moderator / probably impromptu panelist as well. Lillian. And they can talk a little bit about their backgrounds and their interests and get started. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Ari. I mean, so first of all, format is going to be fairly unstructured. So we're going to have a conversation up here, but I mean, we haven't talked about this, but I would like to open it up to as many questions as we can because I think there's a lot of discussion, a lot of desire to talk about these issues, and these issues are difficult. Some of the things we'll be talking about are both how the media and also how our politicians handle some of the most sensitive questions of gender, of equality, of both historical problems as well as current day problems. And so the one thing I would ask is that we try to break from some trends maybe we've seen and keep it civil. And so we'll see how that goes. I'm sure we will. So maybe what we could do is have everybody introduce ourselves, and then we can just kind of dive in. So, Ben, do you want to start?
I'm Ben. Ben Langford. I was born and raised in Big Timber, Montana. My parents currently live in Helena. I've been in Montana most of my life. I'm a law student over at UM. Some of the areas I'm interested in are civil liberties. I think that bleeds into kind of the war on drugs, which I know gets into race, and foreign policy. So I guess those are like parts of the reasons I went to law school, to understand what the hell's going on, is to figure those things out.
And Lily?
Thanks. Hi. So first of all, thank you guys for allowing me to be here and having me be part of this dialogue. And so yeah, thanks for being here. Thank you for having me here. My name is Lillian Alvernaz. I'm from Northeast Montana, from Glasgow. So I kind of grew up with, it's really conservative in northeastern Montana, if you guys didn't know. So I had to grow up like always being an advocate, which is kind of cool. But I'm in law school with Ben. I'm a second-year law student. We're both doing a joint degree of Master's of Public Administration, so we're kind of seeing what law and policy can do together. I'm doing an American Indian Law certificate because I'm enrolled to Sinwapchin, Oyate, and I'm also a Assiniboine, so I'm a tribal member. And my primary focus is violence against Native women, and so then I'm here today.
I too am here today. My name is Lee Banville. I'm an associate professor of journalism at the U. I also worked before that for 14 years at the PBS NewsHour with Jim Lehrer. I'm one of those East Coasters ruining Montana.
It's more California now.
Well, that's what I would always say. Is I had DC license plates, but I'm like, but they're not California, and people would like nod and agree. So, but now I have Montana plates. And so let me just kind of dive into this question, because you both focus on issues of social justice, either in the abstract or in particular with specific tribal groups. How do you see that quest for sort of social justice playing in the context of what is oftentimes a win or lose battle over politics? I mean, can you have serious conversations about complex issues like race and gender when you're also trying to pummel the other person and win votes?
So I think this year, I know everyone's been like, this year is the exception. So this year, no. Like, there's been so much pummeling. You really can't dive into the issue, but I don't know if the parties kind of want to. I mean, I'm a Democrat. I, full disclosure, worked on the coordinated campaign this summer for Governor Bullock and Denise Juneau. And, but one thing I was troubled by, and I know it was kind of like one of those WikiLeaks hack things, was the emails that discussed how the Democratic Party was kind of approaching the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think what that speaks to is that it does play into the narrative. Well, I don't think this is true, that the Democratic Party in general wants to use that as a way to win. They're more than happy to do that without getting too close to alienate people that might alienate. I don't, like, that is so kind of manipulating this discussion of race because you can win from it, which is disingenuous to the discussion that needs to happen. It's not limited to Black Lives Matter. I know Native Lives Matter has been involved on some campus work, and so I think Montana, it's not hard to say and draw a parallel and say there are some people who, like, not some people, but generally I think the Democratic Party of Montana wants to be involved in like positive solutions and actively engaging in kind of the struggle of Native peoples in the state. They also want to win. And I'd like to see them do it more because it's the right thing to do than to win. But it comes down to votes. So it's, and I don't want to say a necessary evil, but at least an evil you can logically understand. Whether or not you agree with that, I think is fair. But
So as someone who worked on the coordinated campaign and has worked in Democratic politics in Montana, were you surprised by the revelations of how the Democrats were sort of, at least some operatives within the Democratic Party were viewing groups like Black Lives Matter?
I wasn't surprised because I think it's existed for a long time. Like, not that desire to, but it's just so convenient when a party you're running against kind of runs on a platform that makes it so easy to co-opt that message in a very tidy way. I mean, it's easy to say, for Democrats to say, like, they're the party that African Americans should support, not because we have great ideas and we want to help you with this, that, or the other thing, or Native Americans. It's because we're not saying as terrible a thing about you as the other guys. Like, that's not solidarity. That's just, gosh, this worked out great for us. That they're terrible about saying these things. You know what I mean? Like, that's not you wanting to solve the problem. That's letting the other side give you an advantage you're happy to use.
And I mean, let's speak about the sort of, I mean, because this is a historic year for Native American female candidates, right? We have our first major party nominee for a statewide office, or for a federal office, in the history of the United States, right? In Denise Juneau. And so, how have you seen sort of issues both of race and gender playing out in that race? Do you think it's helped her? Has it helped her sort of, has it changed the conversation about maybe Native Lives Matter or other sort of issues, or has it not?
I don't think it's really changed the conversation. I think it's just brought it more to light. I think Natives have always been talking, I mean, from my experience, I don't speak for everybody, but just from my experience, I of course surround myself with Native advocates, and I'm interested in this line of work, so I hear a lot of this kind of talk being talked about. So I wouldn't say it's changed the conversation, but I do think that it's brought it more to light. And I agree with what Ben was saying, is that I spent the summer in DC this past summer with the Office on Violence Against Women, and we went to these different offices, and a bunch of the senators and representatives we talked with, of course, are saying how Native issues are theoretically bipartisan, but I agree with Ben, it's been primarily more of a Democrat issue just because, which is less bad, you know, and I would say, so I'm biased. I'm, of course, a Democrat, but I'm also further biased because, going on to your first question, it's really nice to have the conversation of race in this race. But even to get to speaking the complexities about it, it's just like Black and Hispanics. You know, there's no any other racial acknowledgement other than that, and I think the only reason why we are so aware is because we are in Montana and because of Denise. Mm-hmm. So I just think it's shed more light on the issue rather than like changing everyone's minds.
And do you think, I mean, even the shedding of light on that conversation that's been maybe going on within, say, tribal communities or those who are aware of the issues, will it be better now that actually more people are actually even just aware of the issues? And what issues maybe specifically do you think have been brought to light by simply having Ms. Juneau in the race?
So I would say yes and no. Yes, in Montana where we at because where we are at because we see Denise. But I haven't heard. Have you guys heard of Trump or Hillary say anything about American Indian people? Maybe name drop once, you know? So I think in Montana, it's really relevant to us. We're the largest minority in the state, but other than that, I have not heard a single thing from either candidate. But within Montana, I think the primary issues are probably just getting out the Native vote and making sure our Native voters are educated, just like the millennial vote, you know, stimulating education and interest.
So let's talk. And now, obviously, if there are questions among the audience, please feel free to raise your hand, and I will, I guess, call on you like
It'll be fun.
like Chris Wallace. And I will just keep this moving along. Which I will say, what a job, but that's okay. That's not what we're here to talk about. Holy cow. Thanks for being you guys. Let me ask you, one of the questions is, I mean, you mentioned the theme of the less bad is sort of the theme of the year. Does that actually help us talk about some of these more complex issues of race and gender, or does it really just push it off by saying, look, let's just pick somebody, be done with it, and then we'll come back to the complex things, because really, we're really just in this silly season?
I mean, I would say it doesn't, because I think everyone in the room is probably, you know, at least understands kind of the issue of sexual assault in America, like as a broad spectrum issue. And we've talked a lot about sexual assault in the campaign the last 2 weeks. I know none of it's been productive or helpful. You know, I mean, like, we are talking about sexual assault because one guy is saying, I may sexually assault you, but I'm not as bad as your sexually assaultive husband. That isn't a discussion that makes, that like gets to the issue of like, wow, we have an incredibly high number of sexual assaults, and, you know, maybe we do this, maybe we do, I don't know the answers to that. But it seems like it's been so kind of weaponized, I think is a good word for it, and just like weaponized in that theme of lesser evil. You know, like, you know, you say all these terrible things. Well, you're, I mean, we all, we don't need to get into the kind of the facts of that, but they're not talking about the issue. They're using the issue as the hammer to hit each other with. And we do that on a number of things. I mean, I'm a foreign policy guy. They've said, you've been really bad at foreign policy, I'll be better. Well, no, I know what I'm doing, but it's kind of gone to crap. We haven't talked about what we're actually going to do. And so I think that, I don't think so, in general. Like, I don't think it helps with race or sex. I mean, the inner cities comments, that isn't to say, like, that's kind of ignorant on its own face, but that isn't about helping the problems in those locations that he is invoking. That's using them as an association to make the other person worse.
So I would say, I think on a candidate level, I agree with you. I agree with that, Ben. But I would say among society and amongst yourself and your peers, I think the reason that you are saying the lesser of two evils is because you are having this conversation with people and saying, like, wow, they're really not talking about these issues. They're really not talking about these important topics that we should be talking about. So, like, let's talk about them. So I think that for the general population, I think it's good. It's stimulating conversation and issues. And because of that, you're saying, let's pick the lesser of two evils. I don't think it's the other way around. Does that make sense? Does that make any sense?
Yes, I do. I think that makes sense. Okay. So there's some, I mean, there's a lot we could talk about when it comes to the presidential conversation, but I'm kind of curious about, there do seem to be some, I'm about to say some things that are going to make it sound like I'm agreeing with Donald Trump. I'm prefacing it with that. But he, and I recognize the danger where I am now. And so, but here's where I want your thoughts on this, is, I am kind of dressed like I could pull that off, is one of his arguments is that Democrats talk about these issues but don't do anything about them, right? That they use them for electoral purposes more than they address them through policy or change. Does he have a little bit of a point?
So I don't remember this poll, and I think this is kind of an interesting insight to that. And so you're saying, like, they're just using, they're not doing anything for you.
Right. Which is his core argument, right?
And there's kind of this question, like, you look at, like, you know, the broader political system of whether that's true or not. And I think where he's right is not that the Democratic Party tries to do that, but like, not that they try to do that, but there's always that calculation. There's always the calculation of, like I said, at what point is getting, like, again, sorry, to kind of go with your point, we're going to narrow this to Black Lives Matter here. There's a point where the Democrats want to get behind kind of the solidarity movement that's behind that and some of the things. The Democratic Party is never going to come out and put reparations in the platform. You know, and it's so, like, they're always going to measure what they gain over here with what they lose on the, like, moving that direction. And so I do think that it gets down to this idea of American society is becoming incredibly diverse, and a generally white population is starting to have to kind of, on both sides, get comfortable with the idea that we're not going to be the majority anymore. And that is a big cultural shift in what our politics are meant to do. You know, like, it's easy to think of the New Deal as great because the New Deal, kind of in a mathematical way, mostly helps white people. There's a lot more white people here. And so I think it's hard for people to want to add it. People don't like policies they can't see helping them. And so I think in the Democratic Party, there's a moral right to advocating for reparations. I'm not saying you should or you shouldn't. I'm not even saying I'm not. But I think you can understand kind of the conceptual moral right of doing that. But that's a policy, like, the number of people who vote for John Tester who will see benefits from a program enabling reparations is incredibly low. And so it's not the politicians who need to, like, you know, kind of become morally right and deal with the balance. It's on an electorate to understand that some aspects of dealing with racial inequality or with social justice or with sexism and sexual discrimination are things you just have to want to support because you think it's better to do that than to try and find a way to do it while you benefit yourself. And that's a hard disconnect to make. People vote in their self-interests.
Really?
I agree.
Yeah.
I think it's beautiful.
All right. See, I mean, we're being so nice.
I assure you we yell at each other at school.
That's not for here.
So, I mean, there is an interesting element to that, though, where it's large blocks, right? We always talk about, like, the women vote, like it's a thing, which is silly. Because, I mean, you know, women there are a lot of them, and they're different. And you know, a woman in northeastern Montana is different than a woman in
northeast Montana, though, you know.
Yeah, it's exactly. And so I'm still curious though, because there does seem to be a strand of, like, what role do you see? I mean, we're at this really bizarrely historic moment to be talking about problems of race and sexism when it appears, if Nate Silver is correct, which, I mean, how could he not be, we're about to move from the first African American president to the first woman president, right? And yet we're talking about, like, core sort of dysfunctional problems in how we deal with these issues of sexism and racism. How much is American politics driven by maybe embedded or deeply sort of, I guess embedded is the word I'm going to use, sexism and racism? Or is it more that this is something that individuals and voters deal with, but the system isn't sort of built that way? Lillian.
I think, so being completely, totally honest and biased, I think we're absolutely embedded on that, on racism and sexism. And I think that just looking at where we're at after our first black president, I know you guys have heard the rhetoric about Trump being the backlash of our first black president. But I will say, Hillary's white, she's maybe the first woman president, but she's a white woman. So I think that we have to acknowledge that too, of like, I don't know if when any other race of woman will be president. And of course, being an Indian advocate, I never ever think that a Native American will be president just because this country is founded on that unique political status of American Indians. I think not to minimize any other race, not to minimize President Obama, because that our country has that's bizarre to me that we have a black president. But I would say, yeah, we're founded on racism and sexism, and I think that and not to minimize Hillary either. It's beautiful, it's less than 100 years since women got the right to vote, which were still before Native Americans, but that's separate. So I would say that's what we're founded on, yeah.
I think, so I'm going to cite a poll that I saw in an article, which I think, I've never done one of these, I feel like that might be bad form, but I'm going to do it anyway. So there was this poll that came out, and it polled white people, and it asked this question of, do you think that President Obama, essentially the thrust of the question was, do you think President Obama is benefiting minorities at the expense of white people? And the majority of people answered yes, which is disappointing on its own front. But I think what's more insightful to say that it's embedded is this. Okay, so you guys thought that with our first black president, he skewed his care of the country towards minorities. Pretty ridiculous, I think, but whatever. We'll accept that argument. There's never kind of the inverse thought. So doesn't that mean that 40 plus presidents who look a lot more like me maybe skewed it toward that disconnect? I think shows why it's embedded. That we are unable to, when it is in a form beneficial to me, and I can pretty comfortably say me, like blonde hair, blue-eyed white guy here. It's a lot easier to say, oh no, it's not a problem. We're trying to make it better. But when the system reacts to what we would say is trying to make it better with equality, with having a black president, we instantly feel the way we tried to tell other people not to feel. Like that, I don't know how you get there without it being embedded. I just don't know. I think in gender it plays out. I mean, and this isn't even something you have to look at Hillary Clinton running for president this time. I think it's like women candidates, the things they have to kind of show they're qualified to be able to do are openly offensive. Like, I would be offended if someone kind of suggested I couldn't do those things with no knowledge, but it happens to women all the time. Like, how much often do we talk about what presidents wear at debates much, unless it's one of Hillary's pantsuits? Like, I mean, like, is anyone talking about that terrible suit that Bob Dole wore one time? You know what I mean? Like, we don't even discuss the way that, like, male candidates dress and things like that. And for that to be a point that surfaces in your mind, that the way a woman dressed represents how she carries herself, views, whatever you want to take from that, for that to even be kind of below the surface to come out, it had to be put, I mean, like, I just don't, if you put 20 people in a vacuum, and kind of from American history, however that's possible, I don't think it would happen. I don't think they would come out and say, their first questions wouldn't be like, why did Hillary wear that really yellow pantsuit? You know what I mean? Like, oh, did she have a good answer on that? No, but I'm really concerned with wearing that much yellow.
But yellow. Okay, no. So let me ask about, I'm curious about the sort of environment in which politics now happens, and how some of the issues that this talk is about are some of the most personal and difficult embedded sort of question, things that force you to really question your own perceptions, your own prejudices, and yet we're in an environment where most of our sort of the community in which we have this conversation is getting smaller, right? That the people you talk to on Facebook are not the people who perhaps you need to talk to on Facebook about this issue. That this conversation is a self-selected group of people who want to talk about these difficult issues. How much of that is becoming an increasing problem to actually address these core issues? Like, can we really talk about the issues of prejudice if the only people who are involved in the conversation are the people who recognize that there's a prejudice there? Lillian?
Well, I'm not sure I understand your question, because I agree that it is a huge problem, and I agree that I fall into that, because I go to school in Missoula. Missoula pretty much supports, I ride my bike around, see Denise Juno signs all over, so I'm surrounded by people who I think support my views, and and it's unfortunate that I think my one conservative friend, but the fact that I even say that or think that just shows that
my one black friend.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm falling into this issue, and I'm not sure how to fix it or how to even break out of it. Maybe when I go home and my friends tell me you don't count. Indians are like alcoholics, but you don't count because you're like my friend, whatever, that kind of weird thing that happens. But I know that Ben and I were just talking about this, trying to limit your news sources. If you're only getting your news sources from news sources that support you and that feed your views, what are you doing, and are you really being an advocate for your side if you're not looking at both sides or all angles? So I know that I fall into it, and I'm not even sure how to break out of it.
Yeah, all right.
Oh, I have kind of a related question, which is that I originally come from, I should have prepped the audience and said that some of our panelists actually unfortunately had to drop out, so that's maybe why it's a little small, but I come from a blue state, which I will not name because it gets a lot of pay here. But
California?
yeah. So there's something, moving here, there's something that I sort of notice more of a complaint here, and I definitely feel it on behalf of these people, and there's a lot of things that when I go back to visit California, and even when I'm here, I do notice it among, I guess, my crowd of people, which is, I guess, the concept of, the liberal elite. And it seems, I guess it's not racism or sexism here, but it's just kind of a class issue. And I just kind of wanted to know, because I think that concept does have validity, and that there is a problem with liberal elite and where the Democratic Party used to be and how it used to advocate for people who were organizing unions and working people and working class blue collar people, and now it seems to have moved away from that. And being someone who was in grad school, I know people who come from really rural areas, and they became college boys and college girls, and they come back home, and maybe that's something that both of you have experienced, and their perspective has changed, and but now their people back home, their perspective has changed with those people as well, and just how to, I guess, do you believe that there's validity in that idea of the liberal elite, and how can the Democratic Party bring the message back to those people, or become more accessible to those people?
So I agree with you totally. I do think there is one. I'm sure she's a nice lady, but this is the example I use. I individually find it a little bit offensive that Chelsea Clinton tells people about the hardship of their life.
Yeah.
I appreciate Chelsea. I'm sure you do great work. Most of her interaction with real life came through looking through the window of black suburban. I mean, she is, comes from an economically established and privileged position. And I think it gets back to kind of it's an empathy gap of a different kind. And it shows up not just within, I would say, even Democratic politics. You can look at the people who have the greatest concern about the national debt and inflation of national debt. It very much trends with their income. So it's, large incomes, much more large concern. And in both parties, that creates an issue that is very prominently mentioned. I mean, the Republicans really talk about fiscal conservative national debt. And that's not an issue that if you looked into kind of the lesser, non-elite economic status members of those parties, that is not a key issue for either party. And I think, so that I think kind of is the data to give it validity, is that we see disagreements not between parties on issues, but it's not a partisan disagreement. It is a disagreement of priority that I think is based out of, you know, I mean, people who are using social services, you know, food stamps, you know, women's shelters, things like that. The national debt is not the biggest concern. It's feeding their children, you know, and so I think that that speaks to it. Now, how to solve it is very difficult. I went to my undergrad, I went to one university that is Rice University. It's a private school. It's in Houston, Texas. And it was a really tough experience for me. And it kind of displayed this. I went there, I flew down, I didn't have a car, you know, I didn't have the money to just go to Houston and buy a car, and so I was living, getting by. And my classmates were all really nice people, all, you know, most of them pretty liberal as well. Not to say that conservative people can't be nice. My friend's a Republican, he gave me a ride over here. But there was this lack of realization, because I just remember this one kind of poignant moment when one of my friends asked me, like, I was like, can you give me a ride somewhere? I was like, well, no, I can't make it, but you know, you could just get a car. Like you know what I mean? And so I don't know, like, I don't want to say, like, you know, like, let's just go grab rich folks and, you know, drag them to, you know, make them live in poor neighborhoods or something like that. Like, that's a tough one. Like, and it's maybe, like, maybe Lillian can speak to it. When you're on the kind of, the side which you need more empathy to understand, I don't know how you get people to kind of see your situation. And it's partially because economics is really, for me as an individual, you know, kind of with all like the privilege I have, that's really the only one that I can work in that kind of flex in. You know, I mean, Lillian, obviously, and other people here have many more kind of composite issues within that to get to, or not composite, but like, I only have one. I guess that's the only card I can talk about is the economic. So I don't know if that answers your question.
I agree, and I think that it's I haven't seen it as drastically as I have in Missoula, of like this weird spectrum of like being a liberal and not supporting each other, and like who's like going to be more liberal or whatever. And it's weird just when so one of my friends is really involved in I guess the Senate parties, whatever, and he always says like that there'll be Democratic staff people who will be like trying to get some shade on their person who are running for the same position of staff just because that they want to be on there. And I think another interesting thing is it's like running for like the House district here is like you don't really have to run very opposed, and if you do, you're just beating out another Democrat out of it. So I think that it is interesting, but I haven't seen it anywhere as much as I have Missoula. But I think that it's real, and I think that we do need to acknowledge it.
I'm a college professor, so I'm not going to talk about liberal elite. Yes.
Just something I'd like to see us discuss is, like, I think there are some very real differences between the two parties, though, as to whose economic interests they look after. And I think you will see the Democrats line up more with the poor, or the elderly, or the middle class. And the Republicans tend to always want to talk about cutting taxes for the rich, so we'll get the trickle down, which does not work for the rest of us. And so I think there are some very real differences in whose interests they serve. And as much as, you know, they don't give the attention to minorities that they probably should, in that sense too, I think the Democrats support the minorities. And again, you know, whatever is going to happen for minorities comes from the Democrats. Obama has had lots of conferences with Native Americans in the White House, as well as issues with. So anyway, you guys want to talk about that? I guess I just did.
What do you want to go?
Well, I would just say I agree with you, Roberta. Just because I think that as much as we do want to say race, like we were talking earlier, as much as we do want to say it's nonpartisan, it is, you know, and you do see Democrats pushing more policy that supports minorities and those of a lower socioeconomic status. So I would just agree with you.
Let me ask: Is that a why? Why is it that only one party pushes this as an issue? Because I mean, is there something? I mean, because let's not to go all historical, but I mean, obviously it was the Republican Party that was founded to end slavery, right? So you would think it's not inherently built to focus on white people, right? Well, maybe it is. I don't know. So I'm curious why, and maybe you guys are ill-equipped given your partisan backgrounds in the other party to address this. But why do you think that the Republicans haven't sort of made better or made more efforts to reach out to? I mean, Trump's campaign is built around the blue-collar whites, right? I mean, it's not an economically although his policies, I mean, you could definitely make the argument wouldn't hurt rich people. His appeal is not aimed at white elite. It's aimed at white middle class. But why do you think the Republicans haven't made more of an effort to appeal, in a more coherent way to Latinos or to African Americans or to native voters in the past?
So I'm not sure, and I might just be just so cynical, but maybe it's just out of convenience that they don't really have to, unless it's an afterthought, a second thought of appealing to minorities and a wider crowd.
I think maybe it's kind of like the meeting of one historical wave kind of subsiding, another one coming that we're seeing now. And so you kind of talked with the history of it, and some of it begins because they had a lot of success. Like some people here, no offense, this is an age thing, some people remember kind of the dog whistle politics that started with Richard Nixon, and I've read about them. Wasn't there. And even more now, not to say, I won't try and say this president was racist, this one wasn't. Enough standard action, definitely.
Definitely racist.
But so the Republicans win every state except for one with Ronald Reagan, right? And they run kind of the silent majority, and they had a ton of success with that. And I think the reason that they've enabled themselves to not deal with these now is that they've never challenged the success they've never looked at the success they've had in terms of electoral and the voters they've gotten and said to themselves, okay, we're winning. Is this how we want to win? And so they've really just wanted to keep winning. And I think it's fair to say that some of the campaigning they used to be successful during the midterms elections when Obama was president kind of bore that out. They kind of went back into this, well, we know this is successful, talking about tradition and the government trying to do things, which is kind of how those dog whistle arguments began with Nixon and them. And so they haven't wanted to challenge the success. And I guess maybe the other reason they're leaving it alone is because they see it becoming an issue for the Democratic Party. The Democrats just used to say, we're better and get all the votes. And they're like, well, everybody who votes for us, if we say we're better, they're not going to vote for us, so we just lose with this chunk of voters instead of that chunk of voters. Now that the Democratic Party is facing these questions of kind of well, we put you guys in office a lot, and it sure still sucks here sometimes, we're still really not, it doesn't feel like that's being responded to. I think the GOP has seen that, weirdly, that crowd is, minority voting blocks are too difficult to get behind in a uniform way that allows us to win, so we'll just stick with the one that we know we used to be able to do that. That's kind of falling on its face. I don't think it's falling on its face because that voting bloc can't win them an election anymore. I think Donald Trump fractures that, as we've kind of seen. I think most people in here would be willing, anyone want to take $20 that John Kasich would have beat Hillary Clinton right now? Donald Trump made that, removed the possibility from that coalition strengthening enough to win. And I think the Republican Party is wrongly just kind of on a mathematical thought in my mind, just because of kind of changes in population, hoping that, okay, we'll let Donald Trump go by and we can get back to it. So I don't think they feel like they can still win without doing it, I guess is fundamentally my point.
Lily?
Well, I agree. I agree.
Go. There's a question.
Oh.
Sorry.
Wasn't there a Republican postmortem on Romney saying that they needed to activate the Latino vote? And isn't it possible that
Oh,
maybe the Trump primary just blew everything up?
I was gonna.
Autopsy, remember,
Yeah.
the autopsy.
Yeah.
Frank
They-
Davis, where they,
They also needed to close the gender gap.
yeah.
Those were the two things: appeal to Latinos and close the gender gap.
And get less people to vote in general.
They did get, taco trucks to surround their candidate.
I mean, it was, I think, we were actually talking at the school today about how we should go pull all those articles about the think pieces about what the Republicans should do in the wake of 2012 and see what they said, because that would be, I think, very much what they did not do. But, so let's talk about me. No, let's talk about the media that I somewhat work in and represent. How much do they make this worse? When I'm talking about when we're coming back to the core of this, right? About sexism and about racism. Like, how much should the media be held accountable for not addressing these issues in your mind? And it's not me personally, so feel free to say whatever you want.
So I think that this one, they sent us some questions kindly, and this is definitely one of them, and it talked about, like, does the media need to openly condemn and kind of like take the moral position that a candidate using this phrase or whatever you want to make up kind of your own derogatory term. And I, as a person who kind of like, and this is where maybe I might agree with some people in the room, like, I'm a very kind of civil liberties purist. I don't think that's the media's job. Like, it's not for the media to say what is morally reprehensible, because just saying that out loud, I shiver. Like, at the idea that the media is going to start to become like, this is right, that's wrong. Do they engage in it? Yeah, but to say you need to do that is a difference from saying that, like, letting you engage in it. But I think you mentioned it earlier, and I think the media hasn't helped. They need ratings, they need money. They're going to put the most outrageous things, like offensive stuff, gets people to click, gets more ad buys. That's how it works. But people self-selecting news has made that a better economic model. Like, a HuffPost, they know most of the people who follow them, 80% probably liberal, or some flavor of Democrat. I don't know how blue you want to be, whatever. But they know, because of the way people self-select news, that either you agree with them, so you'll read Huffington Post and kind of evaluate it and give it a fair read, or the minute you see Huffington Post, you disregard it. And so, as consumers of media and voters, by self-selecting, what I think we end up doing is we just kind of, I don't want to say we let the media get by with a low bar, but when they understand there's such an obvious way to kind of hit the bottom line by saying, like, hey, we need to get 2,000 more views on our Huffington Post site tonight, or we're in trouble. What should we do? I bet you if you put up an article about something Donald Trump said, you can get 2,000 views. And so I think there's the coverage of this election has been disappointing, and I think, personally, I've been disappointed in how the media has maybe taken the liberty of how we've enabled them, but I'm also really disappointed that we've enabled them. People don't seek out news or ideas that are not, I'm not saying, go find the thing that's going to make you really mad, but find something that questions your idea if the Republican Party is bad on race. You know what I mean? I can't give you specifics, and that's not because they aren't out there, I just don't know. But consumers of media can hold the media to a better standard of covering race and sexism if the way they expect the media to cover it is engaging, is in depth, and kind of analyzes the argument. Doesn't just say, here's another reason to be mad at party X because of something a member said that your party's probably not going to like.
I agree. I think you said it really well because it is really easy to just, like we were talking about earlier, surround yourself with your thoughts and what kind of validates your feelings and what validates where your passion lies or where you find issues. And I think the media has done a really good job of allowing you to kind of just pick where your focus is and stick where your focus is. Following a couple of my news sources, it's really easy not to expand my mind at all unless I actively go seek something that challenges me or makes me think, or go talk to my conservative friend.
Racism, I mean, what Trump has been feeding in the way he's responding to so many people, to Mexicans and to women and to Muslims, and that his supporters are just these intense white racists. I mean, to me, one of the big concerns in this election cycle is how much racism is coming to the surface in a way that we haven't seen it. I mean, I guess those people always felt that way, but they were quieter about it, and he's giving them permission to be really loud and vocal, and he's even going so far as to say if he's not elected, he might say the election is rigged, and is he going to incite these people to violence? I mean, it's really disturbing and scary to me what Trump is doing with racism in this cycle. I just wondered if you guys wanted to speak to that at all.
I agree. I think it is quite frightening just because I guess I've always known racism is alive and well, but I think having Trump kind of, you're right, he kind of validates people and enables them. And I do think, like what I said earlier, I do think that Trump, his campaign is a direct backlash of having our first black president. And I think that even if, you're right, like you said last night, even if he doesn't accept the outcome of this election, I think that just this whole campaign is just, it's not gonna die as soon as the election happens. It's going to be there, and I don't know what's gonna happen, but I think that it is frightening that it has enabled and validated a lot of racism and sexism.
Can I ask a kind of a follow-up of both of you? Because the question is, also though, it probably was there.
Right.
Right? So is there a, this is gonna sound weird, benefit to like bringing it up and saying there's a lot of racism and sexism that's out there that like say, you know, a middle-aged white guy doesn't run into, except then all of a sudden I see it in a way that I maybe haven't been thinking about it because I haven't been personally experiencing it in that way. Could there be a benefit to it, or will it just be a jagged, sucking chest wound in our body politic for the next?
Definitely a journal.
I don't know. I'm curious what you think. I mean, is it better to know, or would it be better if we just all were quiet with our racism?
Well, I don't know. I think that people aren't quiet with the racism among their own squad of racist people and thoughts and feelings, whatever. But I do think you're right. We are walking a fine line of, is this a benefit of stimulating conversation about race and seeing these people who are coming to light with their racism? Or are we, like we just said, or are we fueling these people, and are we like enabling them, and are we just saying it's okay because of Trump?
Because
you know?
there's a lot of you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's really scary because I think that having this candidate and having racism almost be okay, or I guess right below racism, you're not a racist, but like right there, having that and having that be okay, it's really scary. I lost my train of thought.
So I think it can have a benefit. Like I agree, it's very scary to me, and I think, again, kind of to look at it from my perspective, what's the most upsetting about it to me is I can't relate to the specific kind of racial targeting of it, but I look at it in a historical sense, and it's not hard to look into segments of American history and see where it wasn't a racial reason why they didn't like people. It was because they were Irish. It was because, you know what I mean? Like, for a person who hasn't had to kind of suffer the harms of those, like this, silent majority or silent group of, bigots or racists, whatever you want to call them. But because it removes us from, like, it enables us to think that we've never been like this before. Like, that we don't accept, it's not just a race thing. We've always been willing to ostracize someone we didn't like for certain things because we didn't want to benefit them with political policy. But the reason I think it can be a good thing is this, and I'll try and bring in the media. So Lillian made this idea of, like, your group, and I think as a white guy from Montana, I don't know, I can speak to this. I have tons of groups of friends who they would all say, like, I'm not racist. But when there's no one of a certain race around, they don't have a problem using a term, like, their language changes, and even these are some of their friends, you know what I mean? Like, some people will say drunk Indian, but if their friend Lillian is around, they won't say it. That's not really what we're going for. Like, I understand, I'm not trying to police the way people think, but the reason I think that it can be beneficial is a lot of people in Montana, I think my dad is a great example. Sorry, he's getting drunk in this. Your interpretation of other cultures is very much informed by the media. Like, I can't think of a representation of a Native American that I saw as a kid growing up that wasn't either represented in, like, a cartoon or something like that. It was either a drunk Native American or same with seen King of the Hill with John Redcorn. You know what I mean? Like, the media has such an influence on what people see in non-diverse places representative of diverse cultures. Mm-hmm. And this is replacing that as not replacing, but is stepping in as kind of right next to it. Like, yes, we see, we see that African Americans tend to represent, criminals or kind of drug dealers in movies and stuff like that, or how they're represented as, figures in public life with, like, Allen Iverson that's the one that gets, like my dad, Allen Iverson, it's a whole new thing. But so seeing this kind of, like, seeing the struggle, and I think there's proof to it. So had the march for Native Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter. Without seeing the visceral death of people that are black at the hand in police confrontation, I don't think that represents something that people who haven't been experienced to the struggles of black culture can attach to and say, like, okay, I didn't know that, I see that now, I feel that is wrong, and I will involve myself. I know for me personally, like, I've had some understanding of the history of Native Americans in the state, but even just being at law school, when you I think it's doing some purpose in that it's showing that the representations of culture are becoming more all-encompassing. Like, we are actually seeing on TV, like, I hadn't seen a riot in my life on TV until last year. And that made it very real for a lot of white people my age who have grown up in, relative social harmony, to see, large groups of diverse, like, minority people kind of marching and getting involved in these things lets you know that is out there. It's not just like, oh, that's not just some Facebook post I read. No, that's, a couple thousand people on the streets of Charlotte. It's a real thing. And so when you see that, it's there, and that what you had seen before isn't the only representation of that. And that's why I think, while it's kind of messy, it's helpful. There's a lot of great pictures of the civil rights era and kind of the civil rights marches. All the most powerful ones are, John Lewis being beaten at Selma. You know what I mean? Like, fire hoses spraying, like those kind of harsh, powerful images replace what we think it was okay before, and that's not a bad thing.
Well, we have a few more minutes. I don't want to, if there's a question from the audience, I always have questions.
But if I could just quickly respond to what you said, I don't think that's everybody's experience, certainly. Some of us farm our opinions of African Americans, Native Americans, from people we know growing up, friends we have. Some of us would never say those things in our own home around anybody else, and some of us would speak up if we hear somebody say racism. So the thing you're describing may be the experience of some white people, but certainly not all of us, and I took offense.
That's very true. I shouldn't, yeah, that's absolutely correct.
That's all I wanted to say.
Can I critique a little tiny bit of your talk too? I would just say it's really helpful, and I think you're right. I think the benefit of that is correct. But I would all I want to say is just if it's being covered, how many unsolved murders are there on the reservation? How many riots are we having that's not even covered, not even acknowledged, not even picked up? That's all I want to say.
And deaths by police of natives that go unnoticed
Exactly.
all the time.
Right.
All the time.
Thank you.
Sir, in the back.
I'm sorry.
No,
Yeah,
I'm
how do
sorry.
you, a question, how do you see the co-opting of race in politics and government in general? I mean, you see President Obama, he's the first black president, but one could argue, throughout his presidency, there's been less done for black Americans as far as them going to jail, and you see the riots. These issues are coming to the surface, but how does the government and politicians co-opt those movements, like they may have during the civil rights movement, to kind of, oh yeah, we're doing this, but then in the end, the civil rights movement still hasn't come to fruition, if you will.
And how does the movement itself not become co-opted and turned into a political tool, right? Those are almost two
Yeah,
parallel
right.
questions. So it's like,
Specifically around the issue of race, though.
Sure.
As an identity politics kind of issue.
maybe we could speak, I don't know if you feel like it's a relevant topic to talk about, the Native rights advocacy and how do you push that without becoming like a tool of the Democratic Party to like beat up the Republicans.
Right. So I think I don't know, because I think it is a tool. Like I said, when I was in DC, I met with a lot of Republicans who said that they said Native issues are nonpartisan issues. We met with Tom Cole, John McCain, and of course it's nonpartisan. But then when you meet with Democrats, it's more of like, this is real and we believe this, and these issues are real. So I don't know, I've never, and it's really unfortunate that I haven't seen it anything other than kind of strategic and kind of used as a tool. And maybe that's because we don't have enough natives, Native awareness, Native candidates running, and natives in offices. I don't know. What do you think, Ben?
Well, I think you hit, the first note is kind of accountability.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's tough. So one of the struggles I battle with is do you, go work for the government, or do you work for movements to change the government? And that's kind of the crux of your question. And so I would say, within government, I think there's the accountability to not make it co-opting is being a part of it. And that doesn't mean just running. But there's levels of involvement, not even in federal elections, but in state elections. And it's kind of, I really like politics, so I can kind of look at it in the quantitative way, is that you've just got to make your movement have a mathematical enough value so they listen to you. And it's not, that is kind of the way it's built, that is in the design. But as far as government trying to co-opt it, that's the one I don't know how to not do that one, because even when I think about trying to work for the government, I feel like I am trying to do that. And I guess maybe it's just kind of in being candid about it.
Right.
I would rather say, hey, we're working on this bill, and I know you guys were strong supporters of my you really helped us out in that election. It's not everything you want. I understand, just be candid about it. That's, I think, when Trump's strength argument is that Democrats have made it out that oh no, but we've been doing all these things. We've been doing, they haven't been doing all these things. You know what I mean? And so there's kind of don't belittle the work movements have done by saying you're heeding what they're kind of asking you to do when you aren't actually doing. Again, sometimes if the Democratic Party doesn't, get him on board, Bernie had a very strong showing in the primary. I think it represented some of that kind of, you're too co-opting, you're not actually acting enough. It's happened before when the Democratic Party wasn't enough against the war. They had a pretty good tussle outside in Chicago about it. It's right. that's kind of individual action. I think that's the best way. Y'all vote to keep them accountable, so.
Well, we're at 5. Should I stop yapping or? Because I could keep talking about this until.
Can I just say something?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so all of you, please do not hesitate to find Ben and I, look us up, come to our events at the law school. He's at the American Constitution Society. I'm the president of our Native American Law Student Association. We try to have these productive kind of conversations. And we just hosted a voting rights panel in Indian Country.
This pipeline, because sure, that pipeline might create temporary jobs creating it, but it's temporary. There's more jobs created by transporting oil through boats and trains and airplanes or whatever. That creates more jobs than digging a temporary pipeline. Why do you guys think the presidential candidates don't support that or are not talking about that?
And not even just presidential. I mean, even statewide, right? Nobody's talking about it.
The Missoula Dems did.
Well, I mean, all right, but you're a small group compared to statewide, you know.
So this is a great question
Yeah.
that I think displays what I was trying to get at with parties making that calculation of how close do they get. And this is why, what really frustrates me about like racism and sexism in politics is I always felt, so again, I only worked on one campaign, I don't want to make myself to be like, I just am a nerd and read this stuff all the time. But so it seems like it would make sense for Denise Juneau to come out and say, I support the pipeline, like that. And I feel like, I don't know, like I've met her a few times, I don't know, maybe she does, maybe she doesn't. But Denise has to know, and if like she is, a political, she's been involved in state politics that, and I'm sure most people in the state Democratic Party would say, Denise, the minute you stand, right beside Standing Rock, so many voters are gone, and it's terrible. It's terrible to see that is what would make people not vote for you because like, oh, you're looking after Native Americans too much. Can't vote for you now, but. And your question gets at the best point of, I don't exactly know what the solution is to that, but I'd say the reason that none of the Democratic candidates, I think maybe we're all better off that Donald Trump didn't talk about Standing Rock, because I know I am. But because, and it's kind of a question, is it more political calculus, or is it good political calculus or a lack of political courage? Is it you're not doing this because you don't think it's right, because you don't actually, and if that's the case, okay. Or are you just doing it because you're not willing to pay for it at the ballot box? And so. But
isn't there also the argument of if you lose, then that could be worse?
Exactly.
Isn't there being right but being a loser, might not help the people you're trying to help?
I think it's a gamble, and I think you're exactly right, because I think Standing Rock in particular, and thank you for bringing that up, AJ. I think what is so unique about it is that it was it is like Wounded Knee or Occupy Alcatraz. It is like completely grassroots, completely real, completely authentic, completely not covered by the media, and I think that it is scary to be running for something and to support that, because you are putting your name with it. And of course, you support the Standing Rock protesters, but it's really scary to associate yourself with that as a candidate. I think you're exactly right.
Well, I also think that this is really tough too for, it's like, again, it's another nice double standard of like American political and social life, but it's so disingenuous, but a lot of people would say, let's say, Denise tomorrow hops on a plane, flies to Bismarck, drives out. It would be so offensive to me to have one thing become what people define me as in terms of belief or political ideology and things like that. The minute she does that, that's the only political belief she has to people. And that's really terribly unfair, but it, is the lived reality.
And wouldn't there also be the potential accusation that she was just going there as a political stunt?
Right.
And
that's kind of the game, yeah.
Right.
And that's one too where I think that would be Lillian hasn't run for anything yet, but like it'd be terrifying to think you could be accused of appropriating your own culture for political, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
that's a truly offensive thing. Like, gosh, Ben, you're just so, white and vanilla because you want them all to vote for you. I'm just, like,
Yeah.
I mean, like, it doesn't work
Yeah,
for
it's
me.
not
but,
quite
like,
as biting for us.
yeah, like, that's terrifying to think, like, we, minority candidates are put in this, and I would even say women, like, I think, not as much, but I know, I think there's enough kind of in the political history to say that when women came out strong for women's issues during times of kind of like the early waves of feminism, that allowed for people to pigeon them as, like just some women's rights crusader. That is, you know what I mean? They weren't like a single issue candidate, but you can get them there if you want to when they do that, and
Well, listen, I want to thank you all for coming out today and for keeping it very civil. So, yeah, thank you again. Yeah.